Marcus Reed stood at the entrance of Portland Wonderland, his fingers wrapped around the last $50 bill in his wallet. The crisp December air bit at his face, carrying with it the scent of roasted chestnuts and the artificial sweetness of cotton candy machines warming up for the evening rush. Behind the iron gates, a 15-foot Christmas tree dominated the central plaza, its branches sagging under the weight of 10,000 white lights that would blaze to life once darkness fell. Fake snow drifted down from hidden machines mounted on light poles, dissolving on contact with the wet pavement. Emma pressed against his leg, her 7-year-old face tilted upward, eyes wide with wonder that made something in his chest crack open. She wore the same thin winter coat she'd had since kindergarten, its powder blue fabric faded to gray at the elbows, the zipper broken 3 months ago, and now held together with a safety pin Marcus had carefully threaded through both sides that morning. Her dark blonde hair hung in 2 neat braids he'd practiced doing every day for 4 years, ever since Sarah died and left him fumbling through the mechanics of fatherhood alone. The admission sign glowed in neon green: adults $25, children $15. $40 to walk through a gate, $40 he'd earned laying foundation blocks in the freezing rain for 8 hours yesterday, his hands so cold by lunch he couldn't feel the sandwich Emma had packed for him. Emma tugged his sleeve, her mitten scratchy against his wrist. Her voice came out small, already preparing for disappointment. "Daddy, can we go in? Just for a little while?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, at the careful way she phrased the question, building in an escape route for him. Just for a little while, not long, not expensive. She'd learned too young to manage his limitations, to make herself smaller so he could feel bigger. That knowledge sat in his stomach like a stone. He thought about the electric bill sitting on the kitchen counter, the red final notice stamp bleeding through the envelope. He thought about the truck's transmission that juddered every time he shifted into third gear, the mechanic's estimate of $1,200 he didn't have and wouldn't have for months. He thought about Emma's birthday next month, how she'd ask for new boots because her toes pressed against the front of her current pair, but then told him later that actually her boots were fine, totally fine. She didn't really need new ones. The 50 in his hand represented Friday's work. Tomorrow he'd get paid for Monday through Thursday, but that money was already spent 3 times over. After tonight, his wallet would be empty until next week's check, which meant canned soup for dinner and Emma's worried face across the table, pretending she liked it. But it was December 23rd, and 4 years ago, Sarah had made him promise something while morphine blurred her words and stole her focus. "Don't let Christmas die when I do. Emma needs magic. She needs to believe good things still happen. I promise. Promise me you'll always be there Christmas morning. Not working, not absent. There. I promise, Mom." He'd kept that promise every year, working double shifts before and after the holiday to make up for the lost wages, wrapping dollar store presents in the dark after Emma fell asleep, maintaining the fiction that their tiny apartment was enough, that love could substitute for stability. But this year, Emma had stopped asking for things, had started managing his expectations with the precision of someone 3 times her age, and Marcus realized with sudden, crushing clarity that she was protecting him the same way he tried to protect her. Some things were worth more than money. His fingers relaxed around the bill. "Let's go see the horses, sweetheart." Emma's face transformed, joy replacing resignation so quickly it hurt to witness. She grabbed his free hand and pulled him toward the ticket booth, already chattering about which carousel horse she wanted to ride. The white one with roses, or the black one with gold hooves, or maybe the dappled gray with ribbons. Marcus paid the admission fee, watched the 50 disappear into the cashier's drawer, and felt something loosen in his chest despite the anxiety already building about next week's groceries. They pushed through the turnstile into a winter fantasy land designed to overwhelm the senses. 10,000 visitors moved through decorated pathways like blood cells through arteries. Families and couples and groups of teenagers surging around vendor carts, selling hot cocoa and roasted nuts. Christmas carols blasted from speakers hidden in fake snowbanks, competing with children's laughter and parents' exhausted negotiations. Spinning teacups wrapped in twinkling lights rotated behind a fence to their left. A massive gingerbread house structure ahead advertised Santa's workshop, with a line of at least 100 people snaking back through a maze of velvet ropes. Marcus kept Emma's hand locked in his, her small fingers warm inside the knitted mitten Sarah's mother had sent 3 Christmases ago. The crowd pressed in from all sides, adults not watching where they walked, kids darting between legs in pursuit of siblings or friends, or the simple case of too much sugar and freedom. Every body was a potential collision point, every gap in the mass a place that Emma could slip through and disappear. He'd lost her once, for 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours, in a grocery store the summer after Sarah died. He turned away to grab milk from the cooler, and when he turned back, Emma was gone, swallowed by the fluorescent-lit aisles and the midday crowd. Those 7 minutes had aged him 7 years. When he finally found her near the bakery section, sitting on the floor and crying so hard she couldn't breathe, something fundamental had cracked in his capacity to feel safe anywhere crowded. Now his eyes tracked every sudden movement, every unexpected jostle. His free hand hovered near Emma's shoulder, ready to catch her if she stumbled. He calculated exit routes, noted security stations, maintained constant awareness of where they were relative to the main gates. Emma pulled him toward the carousel, visible now through a gap in the crowd. The antique German horses rose and fell beneath a canopy of golden stars, their hand-painted details gleaming under focused spotlights. 1920s craftsmanship lovingly restored, the information placard near the entrance proclaimed. Each animal was unique, flowers and ribbons and golden trim catching light with every rotation. A small crowd had gathered to watch, parents lifting children onto shoulders for better views, couples holding hands and swaying slightly to the organ music that accompanied the ride's mechanical waltz. They were halfway across the plaza, Emma's excitement building with every step closer, when something collided with Marcus's leg hard enough to make him stumble. He looked down expecting a toddler who'd escaped parental supervision, but instead found a girl maybe 5 or 6 years old, both fists clenched in the fabric of his work jeans. Her face was streaked with tears that caught the Christmas lights, turning her wet cheeks into prismed rainbows. Breath came in ragged gasps that made her whole body shudder. She wore an expensive white wool coat with fur trim at the collar and cuffs, the kind of garment Marcus couldn't afford to look at in store windows. One of her black patent leather Mary Janes had come unbuckled, and her dark ringlet curls had escaped whatever careful styling had contained them earlier. Now wild around her face like a storm cloud. She looked up at Marcus with enormous brown eyes filled with absolute terror, and the world narrowed to that single point of connection. Marcus crouched immediately, bringing himself to her eye level. His knees protested the sudden movement, sore from yesterday's work. But he ignored the discomfort. Hey, it's okay. You're safe." The girl only cried harder, burying her face against his knee, her small body racked with sobs that felt too big for her frame. Marcus felt his own heart clench in recognition. He knew that kind of fear, the primal panic of a child separated from their parent, the world suddenly too big and too dangerous and full of strangers. He'd seen it in Emma's eyes that day at the grocery store, and the memory still woke him some nights, phantom echoes of his daughter's terrified screams. Emma knelt beside him without being asked, her expression serious beyond her 7 years. She reached out slowly, carefully, the way someone might approach a frightened animal. "It's all right. My daddy's really nice. He'll help you find your mommy." The girl lifted her head slightly, her sob quieting to hiccups. She looked at Emma, at this other child who seemed so calm and sure in a world that had just revealed itself to be untrustworthy and full of danger. Something in her small body relaxed just a fraction, the rigid terror giving way to a different kind of fear, one that allowed for the possibility of help. Marcus kept his voice gentle, the same tone he used when Emma woke from nightmares about her mother. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl managed 2 syllables between shuddering breaths. "Bella. That's a beautiful name. I'm Marcus, and this is my daughter Emma. Can you tell me what your mommy looks like?" But Bella's face crumpled again, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other in panic. "I don't know where she went. There were so many people, and then she was gone and I couldn't find her. And I looked everywhere, and okay. Marcus kept his voice steady even as his mind raced through options and possibilities, and the paralyzing awareness that somewhere in this crowd of 10,000 people, Bella's mother was probably losing her mind with fear. He scanned the immediate area, looking for anyone who seemed to be searching frantically for a child, but saw only the normal chaos of families moving in different directions, nobody exhibiting the specific desperation of a parent hunting for a missing child. The sea of faces was overwhelming. Couples holding hands, groups of teenagers laughing too loud, families negotiating which attraction to visit next, old people moving slowly near the edges, young people pressing toward the center, all of them strangers, all of them potential hiding places for one small, terrified girl's mother. Finding one specific person in this chaos would be nearly impossible without help. Marcus stood, his knees cracking audibly. Bella immediately reached for his hand, the gesture automatic and trusting, as if some deep instinct told her this man, with the kind voice and the gentle daughter, could be trusted. Her small fingers were ice cold despite the expensive gloves she'd somehow managed to keep, unlike whatever adult had dressed her this evening. Marcus took her hand carefully, noting how she gripped back with desperate strength, knuckles white with effort. Emma claimed his other hand, her familiar weight grounding him in the moment. With both girls attached, he began making his way toward the security station marked on the park map near the main entrance, visible now as a structure designed to look like a gingerbread house with candy cane columns and a frosted roof. The journey was slow and difficult. The crowd seemed to grow thicker with every step, bodies pressing in from all sides. The Christmas music getting louder as they passed another speaker bank. Bella whimpered each time someone jostled past them, her grip on Marcus's hand tightening to the point of pain. He could feel her fear through that connection, could sense how every unfamiliar face made her smaller, more frightened, more convinced she'd never find her mother in this overwhelming sea of strangers. He lifted her onto his hip without thinking, the same way he'd carried Emma through countless crowds when she was smaller. Bella immediately wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder, blocking out the visual chaos around her. Her breath came hot and rapid against his collarbone, each exhale carrying a tiny whimper she probably didn't realize she was making. "We're almost there. You're being so brave, Bella." Marcus kept up a steady stream of reassurance as they navigated through the crowd. Emma pressed against his other side, her hand still locked in his. He felt the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders like a physical thing. This child trusted him. Her mother, whoever she was, wherever she was, would want someone exactly like him helping her daughter. Someone careful, someone kind, someone who understood the terror of a missing child because he'd lived through it himself. The security station finally came into view through a gap in the crowd, and Marcus's heart sank at what he saw. A line of at least 10 anxious parents stretched out the door, each one clutching cell phones with photos pulled up, each wearing the same expression of barely contained panic. Inside, visible through the large front windows, two exhausted-looking security guards fielded questions from multiple directions at once. Radios crackled with constant updates. A whiteboard on the wall listed descriptions of 6 different lost children, their last seen locations marked with color-coded pins on a large map of the park. Bella tensed against him as she took in the scene. All these other lost children, all these other frightened families. The visual proof that she wasn't unique, that the park had failed to protect multiple children tonight, that the systems designed to keep people safe had been overwhelmed by the sheer number of bodies pressed into this space. Marcus waited his turn, bouncing Bella gently to keep her calm, murmuring reassurances that felt increasingly hollow. The line moved slowly. Parents ahead of him grew more agitated with each passing minute, voices rising, demands becoming sharper. One father looked ready to vault over the counter and start searching the back rooms himself. When Marcus finally reached the desk, a young woman with a Santa hat perched crookedly on her head looked up at him with tired eyes that had processed too many frightened children tonight. Her name tag read Jennifer, and below it, "How can I spread cheer today?" The cheerful font made the question obscene given the circumstances. Lost child? Found, actually. Her name is Bella. She got separated from her mother somewhere near the park. She doesn't know where. Jennifer's expression softened slightly. The first break in her professional mask Marcus had seen since approaching the counter. She reached for a form and a pen, then pulled up something on her computer screen. "Bella, okay, let me check our list." She scanned the monitor, her eyes moving quickly down what must have been a database of reported missing children. Her frown deepened with each second. We don't have a missing child report yet for a Bella. Last name? Bella had buried her face against Marcus's shoulder again, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks at the question. Her voice came out muffled and thick. Harrington. Jennifer's fingers froze over her keyboard. Something flickered across her face, too quick for Marcus to identify. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. She typed quickly, then stared at her screen. Isabella Harrington, age 6. That's odd? What's odd? Jennifer seemed to catch herself, the professional mask sliding back into place. Nothing. I mean, we just don't have a report yet. What does Mom look like, honey? But Bella just shook her head against Marcus's shoulder, her whole body trembling now. She'd reached her limit, the fear and exhaustion combining to shut down her ability to process or respond to questions. Marcus shifted her weight, trying to give her whatever small comfort his presence could provide. She's pretty shaken up. She hasn't been able to tell me much about her mother. Jennifer sighed, rubbing her temples with both hands. The gesture made her look much older than her probable 22 or 23 years. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, visible even through her foundation. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. We're completely overwhelmed tonight. She gestured at the map behind her, at the clustering of pins that represented lost children scattered throughout the park's 40 acres. This is our busiest event of the year, and we've had more lost children than usual. 23 so far, and it's only 7 o'clock. We've got teams out searching, but honestly, your best bet might be to stay in the main areas where parents typically look. The carousel, the big tree, the Ferris wheel. If you can keep her calm and visible in those spots, there's a good chance Mom will find you before we locate her through the system. It wasn't the answer Marcus had hoped for, but he understood the reality. The park was enormous, covering more ground than 6 football fields. The crowd was massive, probably close to capacity. The security staff, while competent, numbered maybe 24 people trying to manage 10,000 visitors. The math didn't work in anyone's favor. He thanked Jennifer and stepped back outside, Bella still clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had revealed itself to be unstable and dangerous. The cold air hit his face sharp enough to make his eyes water, and he took a moment to reorient himself in the chaos of the park. Emma tugged his sleeve, her small face serious with purpose. Daddy, maybe we should go to the carousel. Bella might feel better if she can watch the horses. And maybe her mommy will come there looking for her. Marcus looked down at his daughter, at her earnest expression and her kind heart, and felt a swell of pride so intense it nearly knocked him over. This 7-year-old who worried about his feelings, who made herself smaller to give him room, had just suggested the exact right solution with the confidence of someone who believed in her own competence. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Let's go. The carousel stood at the heart of the park, positioned at the intersection of the 4 main pathways that divided the space into quadrants. The antique horses gleamed under thousands of tiny white lights strung through the canopy frame, each animal crafted with meticulous detail that spoke to a different era's commitment to beauty in everyday objects. Flowers wound through painted manes, ribbons streamed from bridles. Golden trim caught the light with every rotation, creating the illusion of movement even in the stillness between rides. A crowd had gathered in the open area surrounding the carousel, dozens of people standing and watching the horses rise and fall to the accompaniment of organ music that drifted across the plaza. Parents lifted children onto shoulders for better views. Couples stood close together, the man's arm around the woman's waist, both swaying slightly to the mechanical waltz. Groups of teenagers clustered near the fence, taking photos and laughing, their youth making them careless about the cold. Marcus found a spot beneath a large candy cane arch that marked one of the main pathways, positioning them where they could see and be seen from multiple directions. The location was strategic, visible from 3 of the 4 approaches, impossible to miss if someone was searching this area. He lowered Bella to the ground carefully, keeping one hand on her shoulder to let her know he wasn't going anywhere. Your mommy might come here looking for you, so we're going to stay right here where she can find us easily. Okay? Bella nodded, her tears finally beginning to dry on her cheeks, leaving salt tracks that caught the light. She watched the carousel spin, her small body slowly relaxing against Marcus's leg as the gentle music played. The repetitive motion seemed to calm her, the horses rising and falling in predictable patterns, a kind of order in the chaos that had swallowed her mother. Emma stood beside her, pointing out different horses with the enthusiasm of a tour guide. See that one? The white one with roses in its mane? That's Rosebud, I decided. And that black one with golden hooves is Midnight, and the dappled gray with ribbons streaming from its bridle is Storm. Bella's voice came out small but curious. You name them? Someone has to. They deserve names. They work so hard carrying children around and around, and nobody ever thanks them. That's nice of you. Emma beamed at the praise, then launched into elaborate backstories for each horse, complete with personalities and secret magical powers they only used when children were kind to each other. Bella began asking questions about the horses, her voice growing steadier with each exchange. The fear hadn't left her eyes, but it had been joined by something else. A tentative belief that maybe this situation would resolve, that maybe this man and his daughter could keep her safe until her mother appeared. After several minutes, Marcus lifted Bella onto his shoulders so she could see better and feel safer above the crowd. Her hands gripped his hair gently, no longer desperate, and she gazed at the spinning lights with something approaching wonder. For a moment, she seemed to forget her fear entirely, caught up in the magic of painted horses and golden lights, and a 7-year-old's imaginative storytelling. Marcus kept his eyes on the crowd, scanning faces for anyone who looked like they might be Bella's mother. He watched for women moving with purpose, for that specific kind of controlled panic that came from searching for a missing child while trying not to completely lose your mind. He saw nothing that fit the pattern. But somewhere across the park, a mother was indeed losing her mind. Alexandra Pierce had built a billion-dollar empire on her ability to stay calm under pressure. She had negotiated hostile takeovers without breaking a sweat, walked into boardrooms full of men who wanted to see her fail, and walked out with their signatures on contracts that favored her company. She had rebuilt Harrington Industries from near bankruptcy after her husband's sudden death had revealed gambling debts that nearly destroyed everything. Working 18-hour days while caring for a 6-month-old infant, surviving on determination and black coffee and the stubborn refusal to let James's weaknesses define her legacy. None of that mattered now. None of her money, her power, her carefully cultivated reputation as the Ice Queen of Portland meant anything in this moment, because her daughter was missing, and the entire world had collapsed into a single screaming point of terror that threatened to split her skull open from the inside. She had turned away for 30 seconds. 30 seconds to answer an urgent call from her assistant about a last-minute change to tomorrow's charity gala. Some crisis about the caterer discovering they were short 300 plates and could they switch vendors at this late hour. Victoria had pulled out her phone, turned her body slightly to block the wind, and said yes to the vendor change because that's what you did when you ran a company. You made decisions quickly and moved on. When she turned back, Bella was gone. The crowd had swallowed her daughter whole, and Victoria's entire carefully constructed world had shattered into pieces she couldn't begin to reassemble. She had searched everywhere, pushing through families without apology, ignoring the irritated looks and muttered complaints. She called Bella's name until her voice went hoarse, the syllables turning rough and broken in her throat. Her security team, Marcus Cho and David Lin, 2 former military men who usually maintained a discreet distance, fanned out across the park with military precision, communicating through earpieces with the clipped efficiency of people trained for crisis situations. But the updates kept coming back to same, a litany of failure that made Victoria's hands shake and her vision blur at the edges. Section B clear. No sign at food court. Checking Santa's workshop now. Negative on the Ferris wheel. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Victoria's legs were shaking, her designer heels completely inappropriate for this kind of frantic searching. She'd torn her cashmere wrap on a fence post 10 minutes ago and hadn't even noticed until the cold air bit at her shoulder through her silk blouse. Her perfectly styled hair, twisted into an elegant chignon by her stylist that afternoon, had come loose from its pins. Strands fell across her face, sticking to her lip gloss and the tears she refused to acknowledge. Every blonde child she spotted made her heart stop, and every time it wasn't Bella, something inside her died a little more. The Christmas lights that had seemed so magical an hour ago now felt like a cruel joke, their cheerful twinkling mocking her terror. The music made her want to scream. She thought about every moment she'd been too busy to play with Bella, every bedtime story she delegated to the nanny because she had emails to answer, Every promise she'd broken because work came first. Every school function she'd missed because of a meeting that seemed so important at the time, though she couldn't remember now what any of those meetings had been about. If something happened to her daughter, she would never forgive herself. She would give up everything. The company, the fortune, the entire empire she'd spent 5 years building from the ashes of her husband's betrayal. All of it meant nothing if Bella was gone. She would trade every dollar, every asset, every piece of property and stock option and board seat for the weight of her daughter's small body in her arms and the sound of her voice saying, "Mommy," one more time. When the call finally came through her earpiece, Victoria was near the Ferris wheel, having just finished screaming at a teenage ride operator who clearly had no information but bore the brunt of her rage anyway. "Ma'am, we may have found her, Ma." Marcus Cho's voice came through the speaker, calm and professional, the same tone he'd used to tell her about bomb threats and stalkers and every other security concern that had crossed his desk in the 3 years he'd worked for her. "Someone matching Isabella's description is near the carousel, with an adult male." Victoria was already running before her brain fully processed the words. She burst through the crowd like a woman possessed, shoving aside anyone who got in her way, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement, then one snapping off entirely, forcing her to kick them both away and continue barefoot across concrete that had absorbed the winter cold. The Ferris wheel fell behind her. The food court blurred past. The Christmas tree loomed and disappeared. The carousel came into view, its cheerful music suddenly sounding like mockery of everything she was feeling. And then she saw them. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn canvas jacket and work boots. He had Bella on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair, and he was pointing up at something, the lights maybe, or the fake snow drifting down from machines mounted on light poles. Emma stood beside him, holding what looked like a stuffed animal. Bella was smiling. She was smiling while Victoria had been dying of fear for 40 minutes. And this stranger had her daughter on his shoulders like he had every right to touch her child, like Bella belonged to him, like he'd done something wonderful instead of something that made Victoria's vision turn red at the edges. Every news story she'd ever read about child abductions flooded her brain simultaneously. Every warning about predators in crowded places. Every nightmare she'd had since becoming a mother about someone taking Bella, hurting her, destroying the single most precious thing in Victoria's life. The fear and the rage and the mother bear instinct that had been building for 40 minutes all crashed together into a single blinding wave that obliterated rational thought. She didn't think. She just acted. "Get away from her!" Victoria screamed the words as she launched herself at the man, her hands already reaching for Bella, grabbing her daughter and yanking her off those broad shoulders with enough force to make the child cry out in surprise and pain. Bella's hands were tangled in the man's hair, and Victoria pulled harder, not caring about anything except getting her daughter away from this stranger who had no right at all to touch her baby. "Don't you dare touch my daughter! What were you doing with her?" The man stumbled backward, his hands raised in immediate surrender. His mouth was moving, saying something, but Victoria couldn't hear him over the blood rushing in her ears and the Christmas music blaring from nearby speakers, and her own voice continuing to scream accusations she knew were true, had to be true, because the alternative was that she'd just attacked someone who'd helped her daughter, and that couldn't be right. That couldn't be what was happening. Bella was crying now, really crying, and Victoria clutched her so tight she could feel the rapid flutter of her daughter's heartbeat against her own chest. Proof that Bella was alive and safe and back in her mother's arms where she belonged. A crowd was forming around them, a circle of faces and phones held up to record the scene. Security guards pushed through, Marcus Cho reaching her first, his hand on her elbow trying to pull her back. "Ma'am, please calm down." Someone else was talking to the stranger, a different guard asking questions Victoria couldn't hear. The voices overlapped into a cacophony of confusion and accusation, and too many bodies pressing too close. Victoria saw the man's daughter for the first time, a little girl about Bella's age with neat braids and a thin coat, staring up at her with wicked, frightened eyes. Some distant part of her brain registered that this didn't look right, that something about this scene was wrong, that a predator wouldn't have his own child with him, would he? But she couldn't think past the animal need to protect her daughter. past the terror that still had her hands shaking and her breath coming in gasps. The security guard was still talking to the man, asking him to explain. "I was helping her." The man's voice was remarkably steady despite the chaos swirling around him, despite Victoria's screamed accusations still echoing in the space between them. "She was lost. We were waiting here for her mother to find her." "Liar." Victoria spat the word like poison, knowing it was true even as another part of her brain whispered that maybe it wasn't, that maybe she needed to listen, but the fear was too big and too loud and it drowned out everything else. "You had her on your shoulders. You were carrying her somewhere. I was showing her the lights on the tree. She was scared and I was trying to distract her while we waited for you." The explanation was so reasonable, so calm, so completely at odds with what Victoria had convinced herself was happening. But she couldn't let go of the narrative she'd built in those 40 minutes of terror. Couldn't accept that she might have been wrong about the worst thing she'd ever imagined. Then Bella's voice cut through the noise, high and desperate and unmistakably clear. "Mommy, stop! Stop it!" Victoria went completely still, her hands frozen around her daughter's small body. "He helped me, Mommy. He's nice. He and Emma helped me find you." The world shifted beneath Victoria's feet, reality rearranging itself in a way that made her previous certainty look like madness. She looked down at Bella, at her daughter's tear-stained face, at the way she was reaching toward the stranger's little girl with one hand, even while she clung to Victoria with the other. "What?" Her own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I got lost, and I was so scared. And then I found Marcus and Emma, and they helped me. They took me to the security place, and then we came here so you could find me. Marcus said you'd probably come here looking." Bella's words tumbled out in a rush, each syllable another brick in the wall of Victoria's horror. "He saved me, Mommy. He was saving me." The world stopped, actually stopped. Victoria felt the ground solid beneath her bare feet, felt Bella's weight in her arms, heard the carousel music and the crowd murmuring, and phones still recording her spectacular public meltdown. But none of it seemed quite real. She looked at the man properly for the first time, really looked instead of seeing him through the filter of her fear and rage. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the weariness in his posture. She saw the protective arm around his own daughter, who was pressed against his leg and trying to make herself smaller. She saw the complete absence of threat in his body language, the way he stood with his hands still raised in surrender, making no move to approach or defend himself beyond the simple statement of what he'd done. He wasn't a predator. He was a father, a good father who had done exactly what she would have wanted any decent person to do if they found a lost child. He had kept Bella safe. He had comforted her when she was terrified. He had brought her to the carousel where her mother might think to look. And Victoria had just attacked him in front of hundreds of people. The shame hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her knees buckle. Marcus Cho caught her elbow again, his grip firm, keeping her upright through sheer force. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Her whole body was shaking now, the adrenaline crash combining with the horror of what she'd done to make her feel like she might collapse right there on the pavement, in her bare feet and torn wrap with her daughter crying, and a crowd of strangers recording every second of her breakdown. "I'm sorry." The words came out barely audible above the crowd noise, inadequate for what she'd done, but the only offering she had. "I'm so sorry. I thought, it's okay." The man's face was pale, his daughter still pressed against his leg, and clearly frightened by everything that had happened. But his voice carried no anger, just understanding, just the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd done a good thing and been punished for it. "You were scared, I understand." But Victoria couldn't accept his grace, not yet. Not when she could still feel the echo of her own accusations ringing in her ears. Not when she could see the curious phones still pointed in their direction. Not when she'd just become every news story about privileged people attacking service workers for the crime of existing in their space. She pulled Bella closer, mumbled another apology that dissolved into incoherence, and retreated into the crowd before she could make things any worse. Marcus Cho and David Lin flanked her immediately, creating a bubble of space as they guided her back toward the VIP section of the park, where people like her could exist without accountability. She didn't look back. If she had, She would have seen Marcus watching her go, his expression not angry but sad. The look of a man who understood fear intimately, who had perhaps felt that same terror himself, and who bore her no ill will despite everything she had done. His daughter was crying quietly against his leg, and he bent down to comfort her, whispering something that made the little girl's sobs gradually quiet to hiccups. The crowd slowly dispersed, phones being pocketed, the entertainment over. The carousel continued its endless rotation, horses rising and falling to music that cared nothing for human drama. The fake snow kept falling, the Christmas lights kept twinkling, and Victoria Harrington, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, walked away from the worst moment of her life, knowing she had just failed every test that actually mattered. 15 minutes later, Victoria sat in the private lounge reserved for the park's most generous donors. Bella curled in her lap like she used to do when she was 3 years old, and the world was smaller and less dangerous. The room was warm and quiet, insulated from the chaos outside by thick walls and expensive soundproofing. A gas fireplace flickered in one corner. Leather furniture the color of burgundy wine created intimate seating areas. A bar in the back offered champagne and imported beer, though Victoria's stomach turned at the thought of drinking anything. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but the guilt had only grown stronger with each passing moment. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, watching herself from the outside, seeing what everyone else must have seen. A wealthy woman in designer clothes attacking a working-class man who'd helped her child. A CEO so wrapped up in her own fear and entitlement that she couldn't recognize basic human kindness. A mother so absent from her daughter's life that her first instinct was violence instead of gratitude. She thought about what kind of example she'd set for Bella, what her daughter must think of her now. She thought about the little girl with the neat braids and the thin coat, the terror on her face as she watched a stranger attack her father. She thought about how that child would remember this night, how the world would seem a little darker and more dangerous because of what Victoria had done. The shame sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold and impossible to dislodge. Bella had finally stopped crying, her breathing evening out into something approaching normal. She played with the button on Victoria's blouse, her small fingers working it in and out of the hole with the absent-minded focus of a child processing trauma through repetition. "Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart. Marcus was nice. He kept me safe." "I know, baby, I know." "Why were you so mean to him?" The question hit Victoria harder than any accusation could have. She had no answer that would make sense to a 6-year-old. No way to explain that fear could make you cruel, that privilege could blind you to your own monstrousness, that she'd spent 5 years building walls so high around herself that she'd forgotten how to recognize human decency when it stood right in front of her. "I was scared. I made a terrible mistake." "Are you going to say sorry, a real sorry?" Out of the mouths of children, Victoria thought, came the questions adults spent their lives avoiding. "Yes, I'm going to say sorry, a real one." She had to make this right. She had no idea how, but she had to try. The alternative was living with this shame forever, carrying the knowledge that she'd attacked an innocent man and traumatized his daughter and reinforced every ugly stereotype about wealth and power and the people who wielded both without wisdom. Marcus Cho stood near the door, his posture professionally neutral, but his eyes carrying judgment Victoria knew she deserved. She met his gaze directly, refusing to hide from what she'd done. "Find him." Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly. "Ma'am, are you sure that's wise? After what happened out there, the video is probably already online." "I don't care about the video." Victoria cut him off, her voice taking on the edge that made board members fall silent and executives scramble to execute her orders. "I care about doing what's right. I accused an innocent man of being a predator in front of hundreds of people. I need to apologize properly. Find him." Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and pulled out his radio. 20 minutes later, he returned with news that the man and his daughter were still in the park, near the exit gates, apparently preparing to leave. "I asked him to come here. He was reluctant, but his daughter wanted to see Bella again, so he agreed. They're on their way up now." Victoria stood, settling Bella on the leather couch with a coloring book from the lounge's collection of child entertainment. Her daughter looked at her with worried eyes. Don't be mean to Marcus, Mommy. He's my friend. I won't be, sweetheart. I promise. When the door opened and Marcus Reed entered with his daughter Emma, Victoria felt the full weight of the class divide she'd just weaponized against him. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, his work boots leaving faint marks on the expensive carpet, his canvas jacket shabby against the room's leather and dark wood elegance. Emma pressed close to his leg, her thin coat making her look even smaller than her 7 years. They looked like people who had wandered into the wrong world entirely and knew it. Victoria rose to meet them, acutely aware of her bare feet, her torn wrap, her disheveled hair. She probably looked insane. She certainly felt it. Thank you for coming. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after the way I behaved. Marcus's voice carried the same steady calm from earlier, though Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders now, the way he'd positioned himself between her and his daughter. You were scared. Any parent would be. That doesn't excuse what I did. Victoria took a deep breath, steadying herself the way she did before difficult board presentations. Except this mattered more than any merger or acquisition ever had. I accused you of something terrible. In public. In front of your daughter. In front of hundreds of strangers with their phones out. There's no excuse for that. I appreciate the apology, but honestly, we're fine. You don't owe us anything else. Yes, I do. Victoria glanced down at Bella, who had abandoned her coloring book to stare at Emma with undisguised longing. She'd been talking about Emma non-stop since they'd reached the VIP lounge, asking when they could see her again, whether they could be friends, whether Emma could come play sometime. Bella hasn't stopped talking about your daughter since we got back here. Apparently, Emma was very kind to her when she was scared. Emma, who had been hiding behind her father's leg, peered out shyly. Her voice came out small but clear. Bella was really scared. I didn't want her to be scared anymore. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a softening she hadn't expected. She looked at this child in her second-hand coat and her carefully braided hair, and she saw a kindness that had nothing to do with money or status or social position. A kindness that was simply part of who this little girl was, probably because of the man who was raising her with wisdom Victoria could barely imagine. That was very sweet of you, Emma. Emma straightened slightly, gaining confidence from the praise. Daddy says we should always help people when they're scared, because someone might help us someday when we're scared too. Victoria's eyes moved to Marcus. He looked embarrassed by his daughter's words, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. But he didn't contradict her. He just stood there, one hand on Emma's shoulder, radiating a quiet dignity that made Victoria feel smaller than any boardroom adversary ever had. Your father sounds like a very wise man. He's the best daddy in the whole world. Emma said it with absolute certainty, with the kind of uncomplicated faith that only children possess, and Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotions she couldn't quite name. Bella tugged on Victoria's hand, pulling her toward where Emma stood half hidden behind Marcus's leg. Mommy, can Emma come play with me? Please. I want to show her the special room. Victoria hesitated, the weight of social protocol warring with her daughter's obvious need. She'd intended to apologize and let them leave, to close this uncomfortable chapter as quickly as possible and never think about it again. The plan had seemed reasonable 10 minutes ago, when guilt was her primary emotion and distance felt like mercy. But Bella's face carried an animation Victoria hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. Her daughter attended St. Catherine's Academy, where the children of tech executives and real estate developers learned French and violin, and how to perform friendship like a competitive sport. Bella came home from school quiet and withdrawn, reporting playdate invitations with the enthusiasm most children reserve for dental appointments. She'd stopped asking Victoria to attend school functions after the third time her mother arrived late, or not at all. Now Bella looked at Emma with something approaching desperation, as if this girl in the patched coat might be the only genuine connection she'd made in years. Victoria heard herself agree before she'd fully decided to speak. Of course, sweetheart. Show Emma the play area. The next hour unfolded in ways Victoria hadn't anticipated. She'd expected awkwardness, stilted conversation, two worlds colliding uncomfortably before retreating to their separate orbits. Instead, she found herself watching Bella and Emma play together in the VIP lounge's attached game room, their laughter ringing out across the quiet space like bells breaking through fog. The girls had become instant friends with the speed only children possessed, bonding over shared games and whispered secrets that made them dissolve into giggles. They built elaborate structures from blocks, knocked them down, rebuilt them higher. They drew pictures with the expensive art supplies the lounge kept stocked, creating masterpieces they presented with solemn ceremony. They played dress-up with costume pieces from a trunk in the corner, emerging as pirates and princesses in some hybrid creature that defied categorization. Marcus sat across from Victoria at a table laden with refreshments he barely touched. A server had brought champagne and imported cheeses and fruit arrangements carved into shapes that probably cost more than his grocery budget for a week. He'd accepted water with ice, holding the glass carefully as if worried about leaving condensation rings on the mahogany surface. Victoria watched him watch his daughter, noting how his attention never fully left Emma, even when answering Victoria's questions. He tracked her movements with peripheral awareness, ready to intervene if the play turned dangerous or Emma needed him. The vigilance reminded Victoria of her security team's constant alertness, except Marcus's motivation came from love rather than professional obligation. She offered him compensation for his help, starting with careful phrasing that avoided the word charity, a check perhaps, or a gift card to a restaurant, or tickets to an event Emma might enjoy. Anything he wanted, really, within reason. Marcus refused politely but firmly, his jaw tightening slightly at each new offer. Something in his expression told Victoria not to push harder, that insistence would cross a line from gratitude into insult. It wasn't pride exactly, though that played a part. It was something deeper, a sense of self that didn't depend on external validation or material reward. In Victoria's world, everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought or influenced or persuaded with the right combination of money and power. Board members voted the way you wanted if you gave them the right incentives. Suppliers cut deals if you threatened their other contracts. Competitors backed down if you made their alternatives expensive enough. Marcus seemed to exist outside that calculus entirely, and Victoria found that both confusing and refreshing. It had been a long time since she'd met someone who wanted nothing from her. She heard herself asking a question she hadn't planned. Why did you help her? Bella, I mean. You could have just taken her to security and left her there. Let the system handle it. Marcus considered the question for a long moment, his eyes distant as if reaching for words that matched internal truth. Because she was scared, and because I'd want someone to do the same for Emma if she ever got lost. The answer was so simple it felt profound, a distillation of morality into 8 words that required no philosophy degree to understand. Victoria thought about the complexity she wrapped around every decision, the cost-benefit analyses and risk assessments and strategic considerations that dominated her thinking. This man operated from principles so clear they needed no explanation. Most people would have walked away. Let someone else deal with it. It's not their responsibility. Marcus's eyes met hers directly, holding her gaze with quiet intensity. I'm not most people. The statement carried no arrogance, just fact. Victoria studied him, this construction worker with his calloused hands and gentle eyes, and daughter who called him the best daddy in the whole world with absolute conviction. He was nothing like the men in her universe, with their expensive suits and calculated kindnesses and eyes that always tracked where advantage might be found. He was real in a way that felt almost foreign to her now, 5 years deep into rebuilding an empire from ashes James had left behind. No, you're not. The evening continued past the point where courtesy required Marcus and Emma to stay. Victoria had been scheduled to attend a charity fundraiser in the park's Grand Pavilion, a gathering of Portland's elite where donations were measured in hundreds of thousands and networking qualified as an Olympic sport. She typically attended these events with the enthusiasm most people reserve for root canals, smiling through conversations about market trends and real estate values while her mind worked through tomorrow's meetings. Tonight, she found herself extending an invitation she hadn't planned. There's an event starting soon in the main pavilion. Just a fundraiser, nothing too formal. The girls seem to be having such a wonderful time together. Would you join us? Marcus looked uncertain, his eyes moving from Victoria to Emma, to the door that represented escape from this world where he clearly didn't belong. I don't think we'd really fit in at something like that. Victoria heard the subtext beneath his words, the awareness of class boundaries and the discomfort that came from crossing them. She'd weaponized those boundaries earlier, used her status as a club to beat him with in front of hundreds of strangers. The memory made her voice softer than usual. You'd be my guests. That's all that matters. Marcus glanced at Emma, who had abandoned blocks to whisper with Bella Oz about something that made both girls erupt into fresh giggles. The look on his face carried such naked love, such desperate desire to give his daughter every good thing even when he had so little, that Victoria felt something crack in the ice she'd built around her heart these past 5 years. Okay, but just for a little while. The charity event was everything Victoria had described and more. The Grand Pavilion occupied the park's northern quadrant, a massive structure of glass and steel that could accommodate 500 people for seated dinners. Tonight's winter fundraiser had drawn at least 300 of Portland's wealthiest citizens, all dressed in designer gowns and Italian leather, all performing the elaborate dance of philanthropy that doubled as social positioning. Marcus felt the stares the moment he walked through the entrance, Emma's hand clutched tight in his. His canvas jacket stood out among the Tom Ford tuxedos like a crow among peacocks. His work boots, cleaned as best he could manage in the VIP lounge bathroom, still carried scuff marks that spoke to years of construction sites and hard labor. Emma's thin coat with its safety pin zipper made her look even smaller, beside children wearing winter wear that cost more than Marcus earned in a week. He saw the raised eyebrows, the whispered comments behind champagne flutes, the quick assessments that found him lacking and dismissed him as unworthy of further attention. A few people stared with open curiosity, probably wondering if Victoria had hired him to do repairs on her home and mistakenly invited him to a social event. But Victoria stayed at his side, not hovering, not making a show of it, just present. A quiet declaration that he belonged there because she said he did, and her word carried weight these people respected even if they didn't respect him. It was such a small thing, but it meant more to Marcus than she could possibly know. He'd spent his entire adult life in spaces where his presence was tolerated at best, where people like him were expected to use the service entrance and speak only when spoken to. Having someone with Victoria's power casually position him as an equal shifted something in his understanding of how the world worked. The evening progressed with the usual parade of speeches and silent auctions and mingling that seemed more performance than genuine connection. Marcus tried to stay out of the way, keeping Emma close, watching Bella charm every adult who bent down to speak with her. The girl had clearly inherited her mother's charisma, moving through the crowd like she owned it, because in a sense she did. Her mother's fortune and status granted Bella access to any space, any person, any experience she might want. Emma watched Bella with wide eyes, seeing a life so far removed from her own experience, it might as well have been happening on another planet. Marcus wanted to pull his daughter close, to shield her from the stark reminder of everything he couldn't provide. But Emma seemed more fascinated than envious. She whispered questions about the ice sculptures and the string quartet and why that man was wearing a bow tie, each query delivered with genuine curiosity rather than longing. The crowd shifted suddenly, bodies pressing together as some new attraction drew everyone's attention toward the auction display tables. Marcus felt the surge before he saw it, that particular momentum of people who weren't paying attention to anything except their destination. He'd worked enough construction sites to recognize dangerous crowd dynamics, the way individuals stopped being individuals and became a single organism with its own physics. Bella and Emma had drifted toward the windows, attracted by the view of the park lit up beyond the glass. They stood maybe 15 feet from Marcus, close enough that he could see them clearly, but far enough that reaching them quickly would require navigation through dense bodies. A large man in an expensive suit backed up suddenly, moving fast without looking behind him, his attention focused on something across the room. He collided with Bella hard enough to send her stumbling sideways. Her feet tangled in the long hem of her dress, something Victoria had changed her into after they had arrived at the VIP lounge. She reached for something to steady herself, found only empty air, and began falling toward a marble column that marked the edge of the window display area. Marcus moved without thinking, the same way his hands shot out to catch falling tools on job sites. the same way his body reacted to Emma's cries before his brain fully processed the sound. One moment he was standing by an ice sculpture shaped like an angel, and the next he was across the room, scooping Bella up and pulling her to safety before her head could connect with the column's corner. She clung to him instinctively, her small fingers gripping his jacket as the crowd swirled around them, oblivious to the near disaster they'd caused. Marcus held her carefully, feeling her heartbeat rapid against his chest, aware of how close she'd come to serious injury. "You're okay, I've got you." His voice came out steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system, the same tone he used with Emma after nightmares or skinned knees or any of the minor traumas of childhood that felt catastrophic when you were small. Victoria had seen the whole thing from across the room. She'd been mid-conversation with a tech CEO about quarterly projections, her mouth forming words her brain barely registered when she caught the movement from the corner of her eye. The stumble, the reach, the empty air where something solid should have been. Then Marcus appearing from nowhere, moving with speed that seemed impossible for someone his size, catching Bella mid-fall with the certainty of someone whose reflexes had been honed by years of devoted fatherhood. The column's corner would have connected with Bella's temple, probably fracturing her skull, possibly killing her, definitely changing the trajectory of Victoria's entire existence. But Marcus had been paying attention, tracking both girls, even while supposedly focused on the adult conversation happening around him. His awareness wasn't the paranoid hypervigilance of someone expecting danger, but the calm readiness of someone who understood that protection meant constant attention, that keeping a child safe required you to see threats before they materialized. Victoria extracted herself from the tech CEO and made her way to Marcus's side, her heart still hammering from watching her daughter nearly die. Bella was already chattering about what had happened, her fear forgotten as quickly as it had appeared, the resilience of childhood protecting her from processing how badly things could have gone. "Thank you, again. I don't know how you move so fast." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting Bella's weight slightly as if preparing to hand her back. "Just paying attention. Anyone would have—" "No, not anyone. You." Victoria held his gaze, needing him to understand that she saw what he'd done, that she recognized the gift he kept giving her family without asking for anything in return. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition deeper than gratitude, a connection that had nothing to do with money or status or the vast gulf that separated their daily lives. Emma appeared at Marcus's elbow, her face serious with concern. "You saved Bella again, Daddy." "Just keeping an eye out, Em. You always keep everyone safe." The simple faith in Emma's voice made Victoria's throat tighten. This child trusted her father completely, believed in his competence and goodness with the absolute certainty that only came from consistent proof. Victoria wondered when Bella had last looked at her that way, when her daughter had last believed Victoria would always catch her, always keep her safe, always be there when it mattered. The answer came quickly, painfully. Never. Victoria had never been that kind of mother. She delegated Bella's care to nannies and staff, showed up for scheduled quality time like it was another meeting on her calendar. Loved her daughter the way you might love a quarterly earnings report that exceeded projections. But this man, who had nothing compared to her wealth, who worked construction for $18 an hour, who lived in an apartment probably smaller than Victoria's walk-in closet, had somehow mastered the single most important skill of parenthood: being present. The evening wound down slowly after that. Victoria found herself watching Marcus more carefully, noting small details she'd missed earlier. The way he never drank anything alcoholic despite multiple offers. The quiet competence with which he managed Emma's needs without fuss or drama. The gentle corrections he made when Emma got too loud or too excited, his voice firm but never harsh. The way other children gravitated toward him, sensing the safety he radiated like heat from a banked fire. Near the coat check area, Victoria overheard a conversation that made her go still. A man approached Marcus, someone Victoria recognized as Robert Chen, board member of the Portland Housing Foundation and generous contributor to various causes that allowed wealthy people to feel virtuous. Robert carried paperwork, the kind of contract documentation that suggested pre-planning rather than spontaneous offer. "Marcus, I mentioned you're in construction. Victoria told me you're skilled in residential work. Marcus's posture shifted slightly, interest sparking in his eyes. Yes, sir, mostly foundations and frame, some finish work, whatever's needed. We're building affordable housing units in East Portland, 24 units. Good work that matters. We could use skilled workers willing to commit to the full timeline. Victoria watched Marcus process the information, saw hope bloom across his features before caution tempered it. What's the timeline? Breaking ground January 2nd, finished by March 15th. Tight schedule, but doable with the right crew. Premium pay, $45 an hour, guaranteed 50 hours per week. Victoria did the math automatically, a reflex from years of analyzing numbers. 45 times 50 times 10 weeks equaled $22,500. 3 months of normal income compressed into 10 weeks, enough to change Marcus's entire financial situation, enough to give Emma things she needed, enough to provide the security every parent desperate wanted for their child. She saw Marcus doing the same calculation, his eyes going distant as numbers aligned in his head. Saw the moment he recognized what that money could mean for his family. That's very generous, sir. I'd be honored to work on something that matters, like affordable housing. Robert smiled, pulling out the contract pages to show Marcus the specifics. Excellent. Now the schedule is firm because we have spring opening commitments. The project runs straight through, including Christmas week and New Year's. We can't afford delays with weather or holidays. Everyone commits to being there every day until completion. Victoria watched Marcus's expression change, hope draining away like water through a sieve. His hands, which had been reaching for the contract, stopped mid-motion. The timeline runs through Christmas? Yes, December 26th through January 1st are critical framing days. Weather window closes fast in January, so we need the structure enclosed before the rain really starts. But don't worry, you can take Christmas Day itself off. We're not monsters. Robert laughed at his own joke, oblivious to the way Marcus's entire body had gone rigid. Surely you can work through one holiday for this kind of money. Your family will understand. Marcus's voice came out flat, all the earlier warmth gone. I appreciate the offer, but I can't take it. Robert blinked, clearly not expecting refusal. The pay isn't sufficient? We could potentially go to 47 per hour for someone with your experience. It's not about the money. Then what? The work is solid, the crew is good, the cause is meaningful. What's the hesitation? Marcus's jaw tightened, and Victoria saw him fighting some internal battle between need and principle. The timeline means working through Christmas. I promised my daughter I'd be there Christmas morning. Every year, no matter what. Even if we're broke, I'll be there. I don't break promises to her. The words came out quiet but absolute, carrying the weight of conviction that couldn't be argued with or bargained around. Robert frowned, clearly confused by this priority structure that put family commitment ahead of financial opportunity. It's one holiday, one day out of the year for significant income that could change your situation. Surely your daughter would understand the sacrifice if you explained it. I told my daughter Christmas means Daddy will always be there. Not maybe, not probably, always. My word is the only thing I have that's worth anything when everything else is gone. I'm not trading that for money. Victoria stood frozen near the coat check counter, her phone still in her hand from the email she'd been pretending to read. Marcus didn't know she could hear him, had no idea his words were carving themselves into her consciousness like scars that would never fully heal. She thought about every Christmas she'd half attended, mentally composing emails while Bella opened presents, taking calls from Tokyo or Shanghai or London while her daughter begged for attention. She thought about Christmases where she'd arrived late because a meeting ran long, where she'd left early because a crisis needed managing, where she'd been physically present but emotionally absent, going through motions while her mind worked through spreadsheets and projections. She thought about Bella's terror when she'd gotten lost tonight, the way her daughter had reached for a stranger's comfort because some deep instinct told her that Victoria wasn't reliable, wasn't the kind of mother who always caught you when you fell. Was that because Victoria had given Bella reasons to doubt? Because her daughter had learned early that mommy's promises came with asterisks and conditions and last-minute cancellations? Marcus was refusing $22,500 for a promise to his daughter. Victoria had broken dozens of promises to Bella for meetings that generated millions, but meant nothing when measured against what actually mattered. She heard Robert trying one more angle, his voice taking on the patronizing tone successful people used when they encountered someone making choices they couldn't understand. I respect family values, Marcus, but part of being a good father is providing security. This money could give your daughter stability. Isn't that more important than one day? Marcus's response came out hard, all the gentle warmth Victoria had heard earlier completely absent. You don't get to tell me what being a good father means. I work 60-hour weeks breaking my body so Emma has food and heat and a roof. I've been doing that since she was 3 years old, since her mother died and left me trying to figure out how to be enough for a little girl who deserved better than one parent in a tiny apartment. His voice dropped lower, gaining intensity despite the decreased volume. But Emma knows her father's word is sacred. She knows that when I promise something, it happens. That's worth more than any amount of money you could offer. Because stability isn't just about cash in the bank. It's about trust. And trust is built by showing up when you say you will, by keeping promises even when it's hard, by proving with your actions that love is more reliable than money. Robert held up his hands in surrender, clearly done trying to convince someone who refused to be reasonable by his definition of the word. Your choice. I'll find someone else. Good luck with whatever you're doing instead. He walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone near the coat check with Emma beside him, helping her into her thin coat with its broken zipper and safety pin repair. The little girl looked at her father with complete trust, oblivious to the money he just refused, knowing only that Daddy said they'd have Christmas together, and therefore they would. Victoria remained motionless, phone forgotten in her hand, watching Marcus and Emma prepare to leave. She wanted to go to him, to say something, but her throat had closed around words that wouldn't form properly. She'd spent 5 years building an empire Bella would inherit, working 18-hour days and sacrificing everything else to ensure her daughter would never want for anything material. But what good was money if Bella inherited a mother who was never there? What value did wealth have if it cost you the trust of the only person who really mattered? Marcus had nothing except everything that actually counted, and Victoria had everything except what made any of it worthwhile. She let them leave without approaching, too raw to trust herself with conversation. Marcus held Emma's hand as they walked toward the exit, father and daughter in their humble clothes, poor by every financial metric but rich in ways Victoria was only beginning to understand. Victoria stood in the grand pavilion surrounded by Portland's elite, feeling poverty for the first time in her life. Not the poverty of empty bank accounts or unpaid bills, but the poverty of a soul that had forgotten what mattered, that had traded genuine connection for quarterly earnings, that had become so efficient at accumulating money, it had lost the ability to accumulate meaning. She watched Marcus disappear through the doors into the December night, and something fundamental shifted in her understanding of success. The next morning arrived with the kind of pale winter sunlight that made Portland's December bearable. Victoria woke at 6 earlier than usual, her mind already churning through the previous night's events. She lay in bed for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom before giving up on additional sleep and heading downstairs. Bella appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:30, still in her pajamas, hair wild from sleep. She climbed onto a stool at the island and watched Victoria attempt to make breakfast, something the cook normally handled during the week. "Mommy, can Emma come to my school?" Victoria looked up from the eggs she was massacring, her cooking skills atrophied from years of delegating all domestic tasks. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "St. Catherine's has winter camp next month. There's horseback riding and art and everything. Emma would love it. Can she come?" The question hit Victoria with more force than it should have, opening up layers of complexity Bella couldn't possibly understand. St. Catherine's tuition ran $35,000 per year, with winter enrichment programs adding another $3,000. The amount was pocket change for Victoria, but represented more than Marcus probably cleared in 3 months. Bella's face carried such hope, such uncomplicated certainty that her mother could solve this problem the way she solved all problems, with money and influence, and the power that came from wealth. For the first time in years, Victoria saw her daughter asking for something that actually mattered, instead of another possession that would be forgotten within days. "Let me think about it, Bella." The words felt inadequate, But Victoria needed time to consider how to approach this without causing offense. Marcus had refused $22,000 last night rather than break a promise. Offering to pay for Emma's school enrollment might insult him in ways Victoria's tired brain couldn't fully map at 7:30 in the morning. By 10 o'clock, after burning 3 attempts at breakfast and finally surrendering to cereal, Victoria had made a decision. She retrieved Marcus's number from the park's security logs, a privilege of being a VIP patron, and dialed before she could second-guess herself. The phone rang 4 times before connecting. Background noise filtered through, construction sounds that suggested Marcus was already at work despite it being Saturday. "Hello? Mr. Reed, this is Victoria Harrington." A pause long enough that Victoria wondered if he'd hung up. Then his voice came back, wary but present. "Ms. Harrington, is everything all right? Is Bella's fine. I wanted to discuss something with you." Victoria explained about St. Catherine's winter program, about Bella's request that Emma attend, about her desire to sponsor the enrollment. She phrased it carefully, trying to frame it as a favor Bella needed rather than charity Emma required. Marcus's response came after a silence that stretched too long. "You want to pay for my daughter's school?" The flatness in his voice told Victoria she'd miscalculated, had stepped on precisely the landmine she'd hoped to avoid. It's gratitude for helping Bella, and she would benefit from having a friend. It sounds like charity. It's not charity. What is it then? If not charity, what do you call it when someone offers to pay for something you can't afford because they think you need saving? Victoria heard anger under his words, but also hurt, and she realized with sudden clarity that she'd done exactly what Robert Chen had done last night. She'd reduced Marcus to a problem that money could solve, had implied that his inability to provide certain opportunities for Emma meant he was failing as a father. "Marcus, I didn't mean to suggest that because I can't afford fancy schools, I'm failing Emma, that your money can fix what's wrong with my daughter's life, that my working class reality is something that needs correcting." His voice had gone cold in a way Victoria hadn't heard before. All the gentle warmth stripped away to reveal steel underneath. "I work 60 hours a week to give Emma a good life. Maybe it's not mansions and private school, but it's honest and it's full of love, and she knows every single day that her father would do anything for her. That has value, that matters. Or are you saying it doesn't?" Victoria closed her eyes, her free hand pressed against her forehead as she tried to figure out how to salvage this. "That's not what I'm saying at all." "Then what are you saying? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you looked at my daughter and saw a problem you needed to fix with your checkbook." The accusation stung precisely because it carried truth. Victoria had seen the gap between Emma's and Bella's opportunities and had immediately reached for the solution that came most naturally to her: money. She'd done it with good intentions, but intentions didn't matter if the impact was to make someone feel inadequate. She took a breath, forcing herself to be honest in a way that didn't come naturally after 5 years of board meetings and negotiations where vulnerability was weakness. "You're right. I'm sorry. I handled this terribly." "What?" Marcus sounded genuinely surprised, as if he hadn't expected acknowledgement. "I'm handling this terribly. Let me start over." Victoria organized her thoughts, reaching for honesty instead of strategy. "Bella is lonely. The children at St. Catherine's are performing friendship instead of feeling it. They're learning young how to network, how to leverage relationships, how to see other people as assets instead of humans. It's preparing them for the world they'll inherit, but it's also killing something essential in them." She heard the construction noise in the background diminish slightly, as if Marcus had moved to a quieter location. "Last night was the first time I've seen Bella really play in months. Really laugh. Really connect with another child. Because of Emma. Because your daughter has something mine doesn't. Something money can't buy." "And what's that?" "Authenticity. Kindness that doesn't come from learning the right behavior. A sense of self that doesn't depend on what she owns or who her parents are." Victoria paused, letting the words settle. "This isn't about saving Emma. It's about helping Bella. I'm asking for help. Will you consider it?" The silence that followed felt different, less hostile, as if Marcus was genuinely thinking, instead of simply resisting. "Why didn't you say that first?" "Pride. Same as you." A sound that might have been a laugh came through the phone, bitter but carrying recognition. Yeah, I guess we both have that problem. So will you think about it? Not as charity, not as me trying to fix anything, just as, I don't know, two parents trying to do right by their daughters. Marcus's response took long enough that Victoria thought she'd lost him. Then his voice came back, softer than before. I'll think about it. Talk to Emma, see how she feels. That's all I'm asking. Thank you. Victoria hung up and sat in her home office for several minutes, staring at the phone as if it might contain answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. She'd built a career on reading people, on understanding motivations and leveraging them to her advantage. But Marcus operated from principles so clear, they made her usual calculations meaningless. The phone rang again 3 hours later, Victoria's personal cell rather than the house line. The number showed as unknown, but she answered anyway. Ms. Harrington, it's Marcus again. His voice carried less tension than earlier, though caution remained. I know this is short notice, but would you and Bella join us for Christmas dinner tomorrow? Victoria's brain stuttered, trying to process the invitation that reversed every expected power dynamic. Christmas dinner? Nothing formal. Just four people who I think need each other. The phrasing echoed Victoria's earlier words back at her, and she realized Marcus was extending the same kind of bridge she'd tried to build, offering connection instead of transaction. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Last night was the most real thing that's happened to me in years. I don't want it to end just because we both have too much pride. Victoria thought about her usual Christmas plans, which involved a catered meal served by staff while she worked through emails, and Bella played with expensive toys alone. She thought about Bella's face when she talked about Emma, the animation that had nothing to do with possessions and everything to do with genuine friendship. She thought about Marcus refusing $22,000 to keep a promise, and how that choice had haunted her thoughts all morning. Okay, we'll come. 4 o'clock? I'll text you the address. Should we bring anything? Just yourselves. Victoria heard something in his voice that sounded like hope mixed with nervousness, as if he was taking a risk he wasn't entirely confident would pay off. It made him more human somehow, more accessible, less of the saint she'd been constructing in her mind since last night. Marcus, thank you for asking. Thank you for saying yes. After he hung up, Victoria sat in her office and stared at her calendar. Tomorrow's schedule showed a morning call with her VP of Operations about quarterly targets, followed by an afternoon reviewing contracts for a potential acquisition. She'd planned to squeeze Christmas with Bella into the gaps between work, the same way she handled every holiday. But Marcus's words from last night kept echoing in her head. Trust is built by showing up when you say you will, by proving with your actions that love is more reliable than money. Victoria opened her phone and sent a message to her VP. Handle the quarterly targets yourself. I'm not available tomorrow, all day. Then she called her assistant and left a voicemail. The acquisition contracts can wait until Monday. If it's truly an emergency, you have authorization to make decisions without me. She sat back in her chair, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. She'd just made herself unavailable for an entire day, something she hadn't done since Bella was born. The business wouldn't collapse without her for 24 hours, though part of her believed it might, believed her constant vigilance was the only thing preventing disaster. But another part of her, the part that had watched Marcus choose his daughter over $22,000, whispered that maybe constant vigilance wasn't the same as good parenting. Maybe being present mattered more than being productive. Bella appeared in the doorway, clutching the stuffed rabbit she slept with, despite insisting she was too old for such things. Mommy, can we really go to Emma's house tomorrow? Victoria looked at her daughter, really looked instead of just glancing up from whatever task demanded her attention. Bella's eyes carried uncertainty, the learned wariness of a child who'd heard promises broken too many times to fully trust them anymore. Yes, sweetheart, we're really going, I promise. But what if work needs you? The question landed like a knife between Victoria's ribs. Her 6-year-old daughter had already learned that mommy's promises came with conditions, that business emergencies outranked family commitments, that love was reliable only when nothing more important competed for attention. Victoria stood and crossed to where Bella waited, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. Nothing is more important than you. Not work, not meetings, Not any emergency someone might invent. Tomorrow, I'm all yours. No phone, no emails, just us and Marcus and Emma. I promise. Bella studied her mother's face with the intensity of someone checking for lies, for the usual hedging that adults used when making commitments they didn't intend to keep. Really? Really, crossed my heart. Bella launched herself at Victoria with enough force to nearly knock them both over, her small arms wrapping around her mother's neck in a hug that carried years of longing. Victoria held her daughter and felt tears she hadn't cried in 5 years finally break free, sliding down her cheeks and into Bella's hair. She'd been so busy building an empire that she'd nearly lost the only thing that mattered. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe second chances existed for people who finally figured out what they'd been doing wrong. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new. Tomorrow she would show up for her daughter the way Marcus showed up for Emma, with complete presence and unwavering commitment. Tomorrow would be Christmas, and for the first time in years, Victoria Harrington intended to actually be there for it. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in fog that turned Portland's streets into watercolor paintings, edges blurred and colors muted. Victoria woke at 6 without an alarm, her body clock still programmed for early conference calls despite her decision to make today different. She lay in bed watching pale light filter through the curtains, listening to the house's silence, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. By 7, she was downstairs in the kitchen, staring at the wolf range her decorator had insisted she needed despite Victoria's inability to operate anything more complex than the microwave. The cook had Christmas off, along with the rest of the household staff. Victoria had dismissed them yesterday afternoon with generous bonuses and firm instructions not to return until December 27th. Mrs. Chen, her head housekeeper for 3 years, had looked genuinely shocked. "Ma'am, Christmas dinner for 4 requires significant preparation. The turkey alone needs constant attention, and the side dishes. I can cook a meal, Mrs. Chen." The older woman's expression had suggested profound doubt, but professional discretion prevented her from voicing it. Victoria couldn't blame her. The last time she'd attempted cooking, Bella was an infant, and the smoke alarm had announced her failure to the entire neighborhood. But today would be different. Today she would make a meal with her own hands, even if it emerged imperfect or slightly burned. Marcus had refused $22,000 to keep a promise. The least Victoria could do was roast a turkey without outsourcing the effort. Bella appeared in the doorway at 7:30, her dark curls wild from sleep, wearing pajamas printed with snowflakes that matched the ones they'd cut yesterday. She climbed onto a stool at the Marble Island and watched Victoria with the wary fascination, usually reserved for wildlife documentaries. "Mommy, you're really cooking?" "I'm really cooking. Will it be good?" The hesitation before good spoke volumes about Bella's expectations. Victoria laughed despite herself, the sound startling them both. "It will be made with love. That's what matters." Bella's face lit up with recognition. "Like Emma said, about the decorations." Victoria pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, grateful she'd at least had the foresight to order everything they'd need delivered yesterday. The turkey sat in its roasting pan, already brined per YouTube video instructions Victoria had watched 3 times. Potatoes waited in a bag. Carrots and green beans looked crisp and ready. She could do this. Millions of people cook Christmas dinner every year without culinary degrees or professional kitchens. "Mommy, can we finish decorating the dining room before Emma comes?" Victoria glanced at the clock. 8 hours until Marcus and Emma arrived. Plenty of time to create more crooked snowflakes and continue the chaotic aesthetic that had emerged yesterday when she and Bella had decorated together for the first time in 6 years. They spent the next 2 hours at the dining room table with construction paper and safety scissors and enough glitter to create an environmental hazard. Bella cut shapes that bore only passing resemblance to snowflakes, their asymmetry somehow more beautiful than the perfect decorations Victoria's professional team had created for the rest of the house. They strung the paper creations on fishing line and hung them from the chandelier at varying heights, creating a mobile that would have made Martha Stewart weep. The centerpiece Bella assembled from pine branches and red berries gathered from the backyard looked like it had been arranged by enthusiastic raccoons. Nothing matched, nothing aligned. It was absolutely perfect. Victoria's phone rang at 9:15, her VP of operations calling with the urgency that suggested the building was on fire, or possibly the entire company. Victoria, we have a situation with the Shanghai supplier. They're threatening to pull out of the contract unless we renegotiate terms. This could impact Q1 production by 30%. Victoria watched Bella add more glitter to an already overwhelmed snowflake, her daughter's tongue poking out in concentration. What do they want? 10% increase in unit pricing, retroactive to last quarter. It's highway robbery, but if we don't agree, we lose 3 months of manufacturing capacity while we find alternatives. Victoria did the math automatically. 10% on their Shanghai contract meant roughly $2 million. Significant but not catastrophic. The real cost would be the production delays if they had to scramble for new suppliers. Counteroffer at 5%, non-retroactive. Tell them we'll agree to a 2-year extension at current terms if they accept. That gives them stability, which is what they actually want. But you always handle these negotiations personally. You said, "Today I'm not available. You're my VP for a reason. Handle it. I trust you." Victoria ended the call before her VP could argue further. Bella looked up from her glitter application, eyes wide. "You hung up on work." "I did. But you never hang up on work." "Today I do. Today you're more important than anything else." Bella abandoned her snowflake and threw herself at Victoria with enough force to nearly knock them both off their chairs. Her small arms wrapped around Victoria's waist, face pressed against her mother's stomach. "You're really staying? The whole day?" "The whole day, I promise." The words felt sacred somehow, weighted with every broken promise Victoria had made before, with the determination to do better this time. Bella held on for a long moment before releasing her and returning to her snowflakes. But something in her posture had relaxed, as if a tension she'd been carrying had finally eased. By noon, the turkey was in the oven, its preparation more comedic than culinary, but ultimately successful. Victoria had followed 3 different YouTube tutorials simultaneously, her tablet propped against the flour canister, rewinding sections about trussing and basting until she understood the mechanics. The bird looked slightly lopsided but smelled promising. Bella helped wash vegetables, standing on a step stool at the sink and narrating her work with the seriousness of a surgeon. "This carrot has a weird bump. Should we operate?" "I think it's fine as is. Bumps add character." "Like the snowflakes?" "Exactly like the snowflakes." They worked side by side in comfortable rhythm, Bella chattering about Emma and what games they might play, Victoria half listening while monitoring the turkey and trying to remember if stuffing cooked inside the bird or separately. Eventually she gave up and made a note to ask Marcus, who seemed like the kind of person who'd know these things. At 3:30, Victoria went upstairs to change, leaving Bella to put the finishing touches on place cards she'd been creating with alarming amounts of glitter. Victoria stood in her walk-in closet surrounded by designer clothes still carrying dry cleaning tags, everything carefully organized by color and season and level of formality. She pulled out jeans she'd bought 2 years ago and never worn, a cashmere sweater in deep green that was technically casual but cost more than Marcus probably spent on clothes in a year. The juxtaposition bothered her, this evidence of wealth that couldn't hide itself even in denim. But she had nothing else that approached normal, so the jeans would have to suffice. She left her hair down instead of styling it, applied minimal makeup, and stared at her reflection with the uncomfortable awareness that she was trying to be something she wasn't. You couldn't erase 5 years of Ice Queen reputation with casual clothes and good intentions. But maybe you could start. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock, and Victoria felt her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. She beat Bella to the door, took a breath, and opened it to find Marcus and Emma on her front porch looking as nervous as she felt. Marcus's truck sat in her circular driveway like a rusty anchor in a sea of manicured landscaping. The Ford F-150 had to be 20 years old, its paint oxidized to a matte finish, passenger side door a slightly different color, suggesting a junkyard replacement. One windshield wiper blade was missing its rubber, just the metal arm remaining. The truck bed carried scattered tools and a tarp bunched in one corner. It was the most honest thing Victoria had seen in years. Marcus had cleaned up as best he could, his canvas jacket brushed free of construction dust, his jeans newer than the ones he'd worn at the park. Emma practically vibrated with excitement beside him, clutching something made from construction paper and determination. "Merry Christmas! Come in!" Victoria stepped back, aware of her house's overwhelming scale compared to their humble presentation. The Victorians' 3 stories loomed above them, all gingerbread trim and historical registry plaques. The interior probably looked like a museum to people who lived in apartments, where you could touch opposite walls simultaneously. But Emma's eyes went wide with wonder rather than intimidation. "Daddy, it is a castle." Bella appeared from the dining room at a run, launching herself at Emma with the intensity of someone reuniting after years rather than 36 hours. The girls collided in a tangle of arms and excited squealing, both trying to talk at once about what they'd do today and what they'd seen and what they'd made. Marcus watched them with an expression that mixed joy and concern, probably wondering if bringing Emma here had been a mistake, if exposure to this level of wealth would make their small apartment feel inadequate. Victoria understood the fear because she'd felt its inverse yesterday, wondering if Bella, seeing how Emma lived, would reveal the hollowness of material abundance. "Can I take your jackets?" Marcus helped Emma out of her thin coat, the safety pins still holding the zipper closed. Emma thrust the construction paper creation at Victoria with solemn ceremony. "I made this for you because you're letting me come to your house." The card featured 4 stick figures holding hands under a Christmas tree, their proportions wildly incorrect but their smiles unmistakable. Careful letters spelled out, "Thank you for being our friends," across the top in Emma's 7-year-old handwriting, some letters backward, all of them earnest. Victoria's throat closed around words that wouldn't form properly. She accepted the card like it was made of spun glass, knowing without being told that Emma had spent hours on this, that each crayon stroke represented effort and care, and a generosity that had nothing to do with money. "This is beautiful, Emma. Thank you." "Bella, look what I made." Emma reclaimed the card to show Bella, who declared it perfect and demanded they hang it on the refrigerator immediately. The girls disappeared into the kitchen, their voices echoing through the high-ceiling rooms. Marcus and Victoria stood in the foyer, suddenly alone, the weight of last night's phone calls and today's potential hanging between them. "Your home is beautiful." "It's too big. I bought it because I could, not because we needed it. Most of the rooms stay closed." "Still, it's impressive." "Impressive isn't the same as home. I'm learning that lately." Marcus met her eyes and something passed between them, recognition maybe, or understanding, or the beginning of trust. "Come see what Bella and I made." She led him to the dining room, watching his face as he took in the crooked snowflakes and lopsided centerpiece and placed cards that read Daddy, Mommy, Emma, and Bella in Bella's careful printing. The professional decorations visible through the doorway into the living room made the dining room's chaos even more obvious by contrast. "We made these ourselves this morning. It's the first time we've decorated together since she was born." Marcus walked slowly around the table, examining each snowflake with the attention most people reserved for fine art. "They're perfect. They're crooked. That's what makes them perfect." His hand brushed one of the snowflakes, setting the whole mobile spinning gently. "Amma will love this. She'll feel like she belongs." The words carried weight Victoria heard but didn't fully understand yet. She'd spent 6 years in this house without ever feeling like she belonged, always performing the role of wealthy widow and successful CEO rather than simply being a person who lived here. Maybe belonging required imperfection, required the courage to make crooked snowflakes and admit you didn't have everything figured out. "I need to check the turkey. Want to help? I'm honestly not sure I'm doing this right." Marcus followed her to the kitchen, where Bella and Emma had covered the refrigerator with Emma's card using approximately 15 magnets, because one was apparently insufficient. The girls were now building something elaborate with wooden blocks from the basket Victoria kept stocked with toys Bella rarely touched. Marcus washed his hands at the sink and approached the oven with the confidence of someone who'd cooked hundreds of meals out of necessity. "Let's see what we've got." He pulled out the roasting pan, examined the turkey with a critical eye, poked it with a meat thermometer Victoria hadn't known existed until YouTube told her to buy one. "This is good, really good. Who taught you to brine?" "YouTube." Marcus laughed, genuine and warm, the sound filling the kitchen in a way Victoria's expensive sound system never managed. That's resourceful. Most people don't bother with brining. It makes a huge difference. I wanted it to be good, special. It will be. You did great. The praise shouldn't have mattered so much, but Victoria felt it settle in her chest like warmth spreading from a fire. When had anyone last complimented her on something she'd made with her own hands? When had her value come from effort rather than outcome? I'm making stuffing. My grandmother's recipe, passed down 4 generations. If you want, I can handle that while you work on the rest. Victoria nodded, grateful for the help, but also for the implicit message in his offer. They were cooking together, not him rescuing her inadequacy. Partnership rather than charity. They worked side by side for the next hour and a half, Marcus teaching her the mechanics of proper stuffing, while Victoria attempted mashed potatoes that emerged lumpy despite her best efforts. They bumped elbows, reaching for the same utensil. Victoria dropped a wooden spoon, and Marcus caught it midair with reflexes honed by construction sites. She got flour on her nose somehow, and he pointed it out with a grin that made her feel 16 instead of 33. The girls periodically invaded the kitchen demanding updates on dinner readiness, their patience worn thin by hunger and excitement. Bella dragged Emma upstairs to show her the room, returning 20 minutes later wearing matching tinsel crowns they'd constructed from materials Victoria didn't remember owning. "We're Christmas queens," Emma announced this with the gravity of someone declaring constitutional monarchy. "You look yummy." "We haven't tasted it yet." Marcus issued the warning while basting the turkey for the third time. "Doesn't matter, it looks like love." Emma delivered this pronouncement with such certainty that Victoria stopped mid-potato mashing to stare at her. This 7-year-old, who lived in a tiny apartment with a single parent who worked 60-hour weeks, had somehow distilled the entire purpose of this meal into 4 words. It looks like love. Not it looks expensive or it looks professional or any of the metrics Victoria usually applied to evaluate success. Just love, made visible through imperfect potatoes and crooked snowflakes in the effort of showing up when you'd rather hire someone else to do the work. Marcus caught Victoria's eye across the kitchen, his expression suggesting he heard what his daughter had said and understood its importance. They shared a moment of parental recognition, that silent communication about how children could accidentally destroy you with simple truths. By 6:30, the food was ready, or as ready as it would get. The turkey was slightly dry, the potatoes were definitely lumpy, but the stuffing was perfect and the vegetables were at least properly cooked. They carried everything to the dining room, where the table looked less like a magazine spread and more like an actual family gathering. Bella insisted on lighting the candles herself, standing on her chair to reach the tall tapers, while Victoria supervised with hands ready to catch her if she wobbled. Emma helped carry the rolls from the kitchen, walking so carefully she barely breathed. Marcus brought the turkey with the solemnity of someone bearing the Olympic torch. They sat, Victoria and Marcus, at the heads of the table, girls flanking them on either side. The seating arrangement created the illusion of a family unit that didn't actually exist, but maybe could. The food tasted better than it looked, though that wasn't saying much given the potatoes' unfortunate texture. Nobody complained. Emma ate like someone who didn't take meals for granted, finishing everything on her plate and eyeing seconds with visible longing she tried to hide. Marcus noticed and served her more without comment, his movements casual so his daughter wouldn't feel embarrassed. Victoria watched this small interaction and felt her understanding of poverty shift. It wasn't just about not having money. It was about the constant calculations, the awareness that there might not be enough, the learned behavior of not asking for things you wanted, because asking meant acknowledging need. Bella pushed her food around, eating less than half of what Victoria had served her, and Victoria felt a flash of frustration before recognizing it as privilege. Her daughter could afford to be picky. Emma couldn't. After the meal, after dishes had been cleared and dessert declined because everyone was too full, Bella retrieved a small box from the sideboard where she'd hidden it earlier. She presented it to Marcus with both hands, the gesture formal and important. "I made this because you saved me. Twice." Marcus opened the box carefully, lifting out a bracelet woven from embroidery thread in red and green, beads spelling out HERO in uneven letters. The knots were imperfect, the spacing irregular, but the effort was unmistakable. He put it on immediately, the bracelet looking fragile against his work-roughened wrist. "I love it, Bella, thank you." His voice carried thickness that suggested emotion held carefully in check. Victoria recognized it because she felt the same tightness in her own throat, watching this man treasure a child's craft project with more reverence than most people showed for expensive jewelry. Emma pulled out the card she'd made earlier, the one Victoria had admired at the door, and presented it to Bella with matching solemnity. "This is us, best friends forever." Bella clutched the construction paper like it contained the secrets of the universe. "I'm putting this in my room where I can see it every day, forever and ever." The girls hugged, and Victoria felt something crack open in her chest, some sealed place where she'd been storing every inadequacy and failure for the past 6 years. She'd given Bella everything money could buy, but nothing money couldn't. This working-class child with her safety pin coat had taught her daughter about real friendship in 36 hours, something St. Catherine's Academy and all its resources had failed to provide in 5 years. Victoria heard herself speaking before she'd fully decided what to say, the words emerging from that cracked open place without permission. "I need to tell you all something." Three faces turned toward her. Emma's confused, Bella's worried, Marcus's carefully neutral. Victoria took a breath and jumped. "Marcus, you said yesterday that being broken doesn't mean you're weak, just means you've been through something hard." Marcus nodded slowly, waiting. "I've been broken for 5 years. Since James died and left me with a company drowning in debt he'd hidden, with a 6-month-old baby, with a future that looked like nothing I'd planned." Bella's eyes went wide. They rarely talked about her father, Victoria's grief too tangled with rage at his betrayal to untangle in front of their daughter. "I threw myself into work because I didn't know how to be a widow and a mother and not fall apart completely. I built the company back up, made it stronger than James ever did, made enough money that Bella would never worry about security." Her hands shook slightly on the table. She pressed them flat against the wood. "But I built an empire and lost myself in it, lost track of what mattered." She turned to Bella, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the shame threatening to swallow her whole. "And I've been a terrible mother." "Mommy, no!" Bella's voice cracked with tears, but Victoria couldn't stop now. Couldn't let her daughter keep defending someone who didn't deserve it. "I miss your birthdays. I'm late to everything. I'm never really present even when I'm physically there. I turn our time together into another item on my schedule to check off. But you're here now." "Because of Marcus and Emma. Because they reminded me what matters. Because watching Marcus refuse $22,000 to keep a promise to his daughter made me realize I've been keeping the wrong promises." Victoria felt tears on her cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. "I don't want to be the CEO who has everything and nothing anymore. I want to be your mother. Really be your mother, not the person who delegates parenting to nannies and schedules quality time like board meetings." Bella launched herself out of her chair and into Victoria's arms, crying hard enough that her small body shook. Victoria held her daughter and let herself cry too, 5 years of suppressed emotion finally finding release. Marcus's voice cut through their shared grief, gentle but firm. "You're not a terrible mother, you're a scared one." Victoria looked up at him, vision blurred by tears. "What's the difference?" "Everything. Terrible mothers don't care. Scared mothers care so much it paralyzes them. You did what you thought was right. Built security because you were terrified of Bella experiencing the instability you went through. Worked yourself to exhaustion because you thought providing meant love." He leaned forward, his intensity making Victoria forget to breathe. "I do the same thing. Work extra hours I don't need because I'm afraid Emma will need something I can't give her. Because my wife died and left me responsible for keeping our daughter safe and happy, and I'm terrified every single day that I'm not enough." The confession hung in the air between them, Marcus's vulnerability matching Victoria's own. "But here's what my wife told me before she died, something I have to remind myself constantly. Kids don't need perfect. They need present." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Victoria thought she understood about parenting. How do I become better? How do I stop being scared and start being present? You tell her. You tell her what you want to change, and then you change it. Not overnight, not perfectly, just consistently, over time, until the new pattern becomes the real one. Victoria pulled back slightly so she could see Bella's face, her daughter's cheeks wet and eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, sweetheart, for every missed moment, for every broken promise, for making you feel like work mattered more than you. Nothing matters more than you. Nothing. She took a shuddering breath. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be here. Starting now. Starting today. You're already here, Mommy. That's enough. Children offered forgiveness so easily, without conditions or negotiations or the requirement that you earn it first. Bella's unconditional acceptance made Victoria cry harder, the grace of it almost unbearable. Emma had started crying too, infected by the emotion even if she didn't fully understand its source. Marcus gathered his daughter onto his lap, holding her while she sniffled into his shirt. Across the table, Victoria held Bella, and for a moment the four of them existed in shared vulnerability, the kind of intimacy that couldn't be manufactured or purchased. When the tears finally subsided, when breathing returned to normal and faces had been wiped with napkins, they moved to the living room by unspoken agreement. The dining room felt too heavy now, weighted with confessions that needed space to settle. The living room fireplace held flames that danced hypnotically, gas logs arranged to look realistic but requiring no maintenance. The Christmas tree towered in the corner, its lights programmed to fade and brighten in patterns that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Leather furniture formed conversation areas that suggested casual sophistication. The girls settled on the floor with coloring books Victoria had purchased yesterday specifically for Emma, matching sets so neither child would feel lesser. They colored in companionable silence, exhausted by emotion and full bellies, occasionally comparing pages to ensure their artistic visions aligned. Marcus and Victoria sat on the sofa, close enough to talk quietly without the girls hearing, far enough to maintain appropriate distance. The fire crackled. The tree lights cycled through their expensive patterns. Outside, fog had turned to light rain that tapped against the windows. Victoria broke the silence first. I've been thinking about your refusal yesterday. The construction job. What about it? You turned down $22,500 for a promise. I can't imagine that was easy. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It wasn't. That money would change everything for us. Fix the truck, pay down debt, give Emma things she needs, build an emergency fund so I stop living on the edge of catastrophe. But Emma needs to know her father's word means something. That when I promise I'll be there, especially since her mother's promises got cut short. He stared at the fire, his profile sharp in the flickering light. After Sarah died, Emma got really anxious, cried when I left for work, convinced I wouldn't come back. Took months to rebuild her trust that I'd always return. Her sense of security is fragile. It depends on consistency, on me doing what I say I'll do. So you chose her trust over financial stability. I chose to protect the one thing I can actually control. I can't guarantee we'll never be poor. Can't promise the truck won't break down, or I won't get injured and unable to work. But I can promise that my word is sacred, that if I tell Emma something, she can believe it absolutely. Victoria thought about all her broken promises to Bella, each one eroding trust the same way water eroded stone, slowly but inevitably. I've destroyed my daughter's ability to believe me, then rebuild it, same way I had to rebuild Emma's trust. One kept promise at a time. It's slow work, but it's the only work that matters. They sat in silence while the fire burned and the rain increased to a steady drumming. The girls' coloring had slowed, their movements becoming languid as exhaustion caught up with them. Emma's head drooped onto Bella's shoulder. Bella's eyes were half closed, her crayon making lazy circles. Should we move them? Marcus's question came out soft, reluctant to disturb whatever magic was happening on the floor. Not yet. Let them be. Victoria wanted to preserve this moment, wanted to remember what family looked like when it wasn't being performed or scheduled or delegated. Just four people together because they wanted to be, because they'd chosen each other despite every logical reason to stay separate. Marcus shifted slightly, his voice dropping even lower. Tomorrow would have been Sarah's birthday. She would have been 36. Victoria felt the grief in his words, the kind that time dulled but never fully eliminated. I'm sorry. Every Christmas is hard. The anniversary of her death, then her birthday right after. But this year, he gestured vaguely at the room, encompassing everything that had happened in the past 36 hours. This year feels different, like maybe there's room for new traditions without betraying old ones. Like maybe moving forward isn't the same as forgetting. Victoria thought about James, about the rage she still carried for his betrayals, for the gambling that had nearly destroyed everything, for the lies that had poisoned even her good memories of their marriage. She'd spent 5 years punishing his memory by refusing to acknowledge it, never talking about him with Bella, treating his existence like a mistake to be erased. James died on a Tuesday, regular Tuesday morning, no warning. Heart attack at 34, while he was at the gym. Marcus turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. I was in a board meeting when the hospital called. By the time I got there, he was already gone. And then the debt collector started calling, and I discovered he'd gambled away everything we had and more, had taken loans against the company and our house and our future. Her voice went flat, reciting facts without emotion because feeling them would be too much. I've worked every day since because stopping feels like drowning. Because if I slow down, I have to think about how the man I loved destroyed us, how he left Bella without a father and me without a partner, how everything I thought was real turned out to be theater. But tonight you stopped, and you didn't drown. Victoria considered this, testing the truth of it against her internal experience. No, I didn't drown. I'm sitting here with my daughter and two people I barely know, and I feel more alive than I have in 5 years. The admission cost something to make, revealing vulnerability to someone who could use it against her. But Marcus just nodded, accepting her truth without judgment. What happens after tonight? The question Victoria had been avoiding finally spoken aloud, hanging in the air between them with all its implications. I don't know. Do you want to find out? Marcus's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe properly. Yes, I want to find out. Me too. The moment stretched, charged with possibility and fear, in the beginning of something neither could fully articulate. They weren't falling in love, not yet, maybe not ever. But they were falling into trust, into the kind of connection that came from seeing each other's worst moments and choosing to stay anyway. The girls had fallen completely asleep on the floor, Emma's hand clasped in Bella's, both their mouths slightly open in the universal expression of childhood unconsciousness. Marcus stood carefully, moving toward them with the intention of gathering Emma for departure. Victoria heard herself speaking before her brain authorized the words. Stay. Marcus froze mid-reach. What? Stay the night. The guest room is ready. They're comfortable here. It's late. She was asking for more than just overnight accommodation, and they both knew it. Inviting them deeper into her life, into her space, into the possibility of whatever they were becoming. Marcus straightened, his expression conflicted. I don't know if that's appropriate. It's Christmas. They're happy. Does appropriate matter more than that? The question hung between them while Marcus processed, his eyes moving from the sleeping girls to Victoria to the windows, where rain streaked the glass. Okay, just tonight. They moved the girls carefully, Marcus carrying Emma up the curved staircase while Victoria directed him to the guest room. It was decorated in soft blues and creams, generic hotel elegance that welcomed everyone by offering nothing personal. But the bed was comfortable and the room was warm, and Emma barely stirred when Marcus laid her down and pulled the covers up to her chin. Victoria carried Bella to her room next door. The pink explosion of princess furniture and stuffed animals that Bella rarely engaged with because she had no one to play with. She tucked her daughter in, whispering promises into the darkness about tomorrow and the next day and all the days after, about being present and keeping commitments and choosing Bella over everything else. Marcus and Victoria met in the hallway between the two rooms, the house quiet around them except for the rain and the settling sounds of old architecture. They stood close enough to smell each other's shampoo, far enough to maintain the pretense that this was just friendly co-parenting rather than something more complicated. Thank you for staying. Thank you for asking. Victoria wanted to say more, wanted to articulate the shifting she felt happening inside herself. The way everything she thought she understood about success was being rewritten by a construction worker and his 7-year-old daughter. But words failed her, so she settled for the simple truth. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Victoria. He didn't move toward her, didn't try to create a moment that would complicate what was already complicated enough. Just held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary, communicating something without words, then stepped into the guest room and closed the door with a soft click. Victoria stood in the hallway for a moment after, feeling the house breathe around her, feeling her own breath steady after a day that had demanded everything she had to give. Then she went to her room and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep would be elusive but not minding, wanting to stay awake to preserve this feeling of having done something right for once. Morning came gray and damp, Portland's typical December weather wrapping the city in clouds that made sunrise theoretical rather than visible. Victoria woke to the sound of voices downstairs, children's laughter mixed with the clatter of kitchen implements being deployed inexpertly. She found Bella and Emma in the kitchen attempting to make pancakes with the determination of generals planning campaigns. Batter covered the counter, the floor, and somehow the ceiling, though Victoria couldn't determine the physics that would accomplish that feat. Bella held a mixing bowl while Emma wielded a wooden spoon with violent enthusiasm. "More milk, Bella, it's too thick." "How much more?" "I don't know, lots." They hadn't noticed Victoria yet, too focused on their culinary disaster. She leaned against the door frame and watched, fighting the urge to intervene and correct, letting them make their mistakes because mistakes were how children learned, and she'd robbed Bella of too many learning opportunities by having staff handle everything. Marcus appeared beside her, equally silent, equally content to let the girls experiment. "Should we stop them?" "Absolutely not. This is perfect." 20 minutes later, they sat at the kitchen island, eating lumpy pancakes that tasted better than they looked, which wasn't saying much given their appearance suggested geological formations. But the girls beamed with pride, and Victoria ate every bite while making appreciative sounds that weren't entirely forced. "These are the best pancakes ever." Bella delivered this verdict with absolute sincerity. "Because we made them with love." Emma had apparently decided this was her signature phrase, the explanation for everything good in life. Victoria caught Marcus's eye across the island, and they shared a smile that felt like a secret language being invented in real time. After breakfast, after the kitchen had been cleaned and the girls had run upstairs to play, Marcus and Victoria found themselves alone again. "We should talk about the arrangement, the school enrollment, the work contract." Victoria mentioned to Marcus over the phone yesterday about maintenance work for her buildings. "Monday, come to my office at 10. We'll formalize everything properly. Contract terms, employment details. School enrollment if you decide that's right for Emma." "Emma and I talked last night before bed. She wants to go. She's nervous but excited." "And you?" Marcus took a breath, wrestling with pride and pragmatism. "I want her to have opportunities. If that means accepting help, then I'll accept help. Not as charity, as partnership." "Partnership. I like that." Emma appeared from upstairs, Bella trailing behind her, both girls wearing serious expressions. "Daddy, can we come back here to see Bella and Miss Victoria?" Marcus looked at Victoria, the question in his eyes asking for permission or confirmation, or maybe just reassurance that this wasn't a one-time charity gesture. "I think that can be arranged. Would you like that, Bella?" "Can Emma come all the time?" "Maybe not all the time, but often as your daddy says is okay." The girls erupted into cheers and immediately began planning their next play date with the intensity of military strategists. Marcus and Victoria let them negotiate the details, content to observe this friendship that had formed so quickly and completely. By noon, it was time for Marcus and Emma to leave, both girls crying dramatically about the separation despite knowing they'd see each other in 3 days. The goodbye process took 20 minutes, multiple false starts as one girl remembered something else she needed to tell the other. Victoria walked them to the truck, Bella clutching her hand and waving to Emma with the other. The rain had stopped, but fog remained, turning the driveway into something from a Gothic novel. "Thank you for Christmas, Miss Victoria. It was magical." Emma's earnest gratitude made Victoria's throat tighten again. This constant emotion, something she wasn't used to managing. "Thank you for making it magical. We couldn't have done it without you." Marcus opened the truck's passenger door, lifting Emma into the seat and buckling her carefully. Then he turned to Victoria, his hand extended formally before he seemed to think better of it and just stood there looking uncertain. Monday, 10 a.m. I'll be there. With a real contract, fair terms, nothing that makes me feel like I'm taking charity. Nothing but respect and partnership. I promise. The word promise carried weight they both felt, the sacred nature of commitments made and kept. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, something passing between them that had no name yet but might eventually. Then he climbed into the truck and started the engine, which coughed twice before catching. Victoria and Bella stood on the porch watching them drive away, Bella waving frantically until the truck disappeared into fog. Inside, the house felt different. Still too big, still too perfect in all the wrong ways, but somehow less lonely. Victoria looked at the dining room where crooked snowflakes still hung from the chandelier, at the refrigerator where Emma's card remained attached with excessive magnets, at the faint smell of pancakes that lingered in the kitchen despite all attempts to ventilate. Mommy, can we keep the snowflakes up forever? Forever and ever if you want. Bella hugged her mother's waist, and Victoria hugged back, feeling the weight of promises made and promises still to keep. In the truck, Emma chattered about Christmas and castles and her new best friend, her voice bright with happiness Marcus had been afraid he'd never be able to provide. He drove through Portland's fog-wrapped streets thinking about Victoria's offer, about Emma's future, about the courage required to accept help without losing yourself. Daddy, I really like Bella and Miss Victoria. Me too, Em. Are we going to see them a lot? I think so, if that's what you want. It is. It feels like we found something we didn't know we lost. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his 7-year-old daughter's words cutting through defenses he didn't know he'd built. What did we lose, Em? A family, not like Mommy, but a family we chose. Is that okay? To have a new family even though we still love Mommy? The question contained depths Emma didn't fully understand, asking permission to move forward, to let new people in, to believe that love could expand rather than replace. That's more than okay, sweetheart. That's perfect. Mommy would want us to be happy. She'd want us to find people who make us better. Good, because I think they need us too. At her house, Victoria tucked Bella into bed that night, her daughter's eyelids heavy from a day of playing and crying and experiencing emotions too big for a 6-year-old body. Mommy, will you be at my school play next month? Front row, I promise. What if work needs you? Nothing is more important than you. I'll be there. Bella studied her mother's face, looking for the usual hedging, the escape clauses that had always been there before. Finding none, she smiled and closed her eyes. I love you, Mommy. I love you more than everything else combined, more than all my money, all my companies, all my success. You're what matters. You're all that matters. Victoria sat beside her daughter's bed until Bella's breathing evened into sleep, then went downstairs to her office where she'd spent so many late nights working while Bella slept alone upstairs. Emma's cards sat on her desk now, the stick figures holding hands reminding her what family could look like if you were brave enough to build it. She thought about Marcus refusing money to keep promises, about Emma's wisdom delivered in 4-word sentences, about Bella's forgiveness that asked for nothing except presence. She thought about the courage required to accept help, to admit you didn't have everything figured out, to trust that letting people in wouldn't destroy the careful walls you'd built. Tomorrow she'd go to the office and start delegating more, trusting her team to handle crises without her constant oversight. She'd block out time on her calendar marked Bella, in all caps, untouchable by any meeting or emergency. She'd start keeping promises, one after another, rebuilding trust the same way water carved canyons, slowly but inevitably. Tomorrow she'd begin the work of being present instead of perfect. But tonight she sat in her office, holding a construction paper card and feeling rich in ways that had nothing to do with money, feeling like maybe she'd finally found the thing she'd been building toward all along without knowing it. Sometimes the best gifts came wrapped in courage. The courage to help a stranger's lost child. The courage to apologize when you were wrong. The courage to accept help when you needed it. The courage to believe that broken didn't mean ending, just beginning differently. And sometimes family wasn't the one you were born into, or even the one you married into, but the one you chose with clear eyes and open hearts, built from imperfect pancakes and crooked snowflakes and the simple decision to show up when it mattered most.